you had a good break from our last lesson, and look forward now to talking with you about a subject that to me is one of the almost hidden addictions, but yet is very rampant. What we see is about one in four young people are gambling on the internet these days, or going to the bingo parlors and playing more cards than grandma and grandpa to get their money. The rising epidemic that we have in the area of addiction is gambling. And we see more and more of our young people caught up in this particular arena. In this lesson, I want to do a couple of different things, and as time allows. And there's one piece I really need to talk about with character defects and overall in terms of addictions, but I want to see how our time works and try to work that in either in this lesson or in one of the other lessons. But I do want to spend our time on what the assigned topic is. Gambling is an area where, again, as in all the addictions, this is where we have compulsions and the obsessions, the preoccupation, the increases in tolerance come in with gambling, just like they do the other addictions. The difference in gambling addictions and some of the other addictions are that the chemicals that persons are chasing to chase the high are chemicals that are already in the body naturally. And that is our endorphins and the adrenaline, those things that kick in during that fight or flight time. And with gambling, people can go into overdrive on their own chemicals. That same thing would be true if we have obsessions with exercise, where we're chasing our own natural highs, or if we are in some of the other addictions, such as relationship addictions, where folks want to feel like they're in love all the time and they got that little pitter-patter in their heart going, and we kick that in gear with some of the natural stuff that's in our body, but we begin to feed on that. We're not happy until we have that feeling. So we chase that feeling and kind of ride that high in our own life, rather than to let our life kind of ebb and wane like would be maybe a more normal thing. Before I can really talk a lot about the subject of gambling, I want to actually talk about the norm as God placed it for us in terms of how does God plan for our budgets to be in our life. And I think a lot of times we as Christians need to look at the fact that God has told us the kind of budget we're supposed to have. Did you know God's already made your budget for you? And I want to talk just a minute about that. In Matthew, the 6th chapter, verse 33, here we find that the very first thing that comes in our budget, two things actually are on the first line when you make out a budget. And this is all about stewardship, how we as Christians guard or manage those blessings God's given us. The very first line, there are two things. But seek ye first the kingdom of God, that's one thing, and His righteousness, that's the second thing. Those are two different things, by the way. And he says all these other things can be added to you. And he's talking there about the necessities of life. So in our budget, if we're going to do things right, then the church, the kingdom of God, the church, and the righteousness of Jesus, that is doing what Jesus wants us to do, our budget needs to allocate the resources to see that happens first in our life. Now, if that's not first, nothing else will happen right in your life. Because until God comes first, if God comes second or third or fourth, then we've got our life all out of balance and out of whack. Now, the folks in the Old Testament learned that in the book of Malachi. What they were thinking is, well, something's wrong here. They were right about that, but they were wrong about what was wrong. And what they thought is, well, maybe God's hands got shorter, maybe He's gone deaf on us, and He's just not there for us to provide for us all these things we want. And God says, well, no, it's not about me. It's about the fact that you've been cheating me. And the fact that you've been cheating me is evidenced by you've been robbing me in your sacrifice and your offerings. And God says, I'll tell you what, you test me. You put me first in your life and see if I don't open the windows of heaven and give you blessings that are much larger for you to receive. God's people need to learn what kind of scoop to use. I was in a meeting sitting in the audience, and Bill, I'm going to do this one day if I can find a store that sells these. But there was a fellow that come behind the pulpit, and he had all kinds of scoops. Now there was little scoops like you use in a canister to dip out a little sugar and measure that out. And he went all the way from this little scoop all the way to this huge scoop, like you get these big nails out of a bin with back in the old times where they put them in plastic packages. And he said, well, here's what happens in our lives as Christians. That what we do is we say, well, Lord, I'm going to use this little scoop that we have in the canister to dip out a piece of my budget to give to you. And God says, can I use your scoop? Oh, no, Lord, I want you to use this big scoop. Oh, no. With what measure you can measure, I'll measure it back to you. Use the little scoop, I'll use the little scoop. Well, hold on, Lord, let me step up the size of the scoop. And ultimately, if we want God to use the big scoop, we better be using the big scoop too. Because with what measure you measure, it'll be measured back to you. I just think that's a beautiful visual. One day I'm going to do that. And you'll see me walking around with clanging scoops in the pulpit. But the point is made that we expect God to use the big scoop in our life, God to abundantly give us blessings just because we say we want that in prayer, but we're not willing to make the sacrifice to scoop to God those pieces of our life that bless His work. And I want to suggest to you that until God comes first in our life, nothing else is going to work too right. In the second place, in our budget, according to the Scriptures, we have an obligation to take care of our own, and especially those of our own household. Now, notice I said that two different ways here, because sometimes the people we have responsibilities for are living with us. I believe what that simply says in 1 Timothy 5 and verse 8 is the passage, caring for our own, and especially those of our own household. There are sometimes moms and dads or relatives that we have an obligation for. The Bible is very clear on that, even out to aunts and other relatives. And what I suggest is that if we have an obligation to provide for them, family takes care of family. Long before there was the days of TANF and food stamps and Social Security and all the benefits and all those things, long before that was ever there, God had a plan. And that plan is still in place. And I fear sometimes lest we have stepped back from God's plan and gone on the government plan. But God's plan is still there and still a requirement. Now, it may be that we wed those two and we use resources available, but it does not excuse us from our obligations as people in taking care of our families. Family takes care of family. Wish I had more time to develop that, but I'm going to leave that. The third thing here I want to suggest to you is that we need to take care of ourselves. That is, that we, in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 5 and verse 18, we have a portion under the sun to eat and drink, and get this, and to enjoy the fruit of our labor. And some folks think, well, no, it's selfish if I take anything for myself. No, it isn't. It wasn't selfish when Abraham did it. It wasn't selfish when Job did it. Those are men of God. Those are people that serve God, and God expects us to be able to enjoy things in life. So just because we may have a nice way around or nice ride, I think we call it. Got me a nice ride. Or we live in a fancy house, or we're all dressed out to the nines or whatever, just because we've got all those things doesn't mean that we're unfaithful. But we need to allocate some resources for ourselves. And here's where a lot of folks get themselves in trouble, especially in this area of mental health, is they work and they work and they work and they work, and then they work and they work. And what they do is they work themselves right into the ground, where they have run totally out of energy, they have burned out, their own crisp, their own deep fried, and they haven't been taking care of themselves. There was a lady came to me in one place. She was having all kinds of problems, being dizzy, and she was frustrated, and life was just not real grand for her. And she came to me, and one of the simple things I asked her was, I called her by name, and I said, when is the last time that you took a vacation? What I was really asking is, when's the last time you did something for yourself? And she said, oh, I haven't done that in years. And I said, well, maybe that's what's going on. You're burning the candle at both ends. You know, she paid me $85 to tell her to take a vacation. It's a little deeper than that. But she did. She went on vacation, and you know, to this day, she still sends me a thank you card every year. You saved my life. All you need to do is take a break. If you don't take a break, you will break. That's part of who we are. We cannot go on energy out all the time and not have some recharge. We burn out. And by the way, we're kind of designed that way by someone we all know, who also rested on the seventh day. Well, we need to take time for ourselves. In the fourth place, we also need to learn that everything we have is not intended to be spent or where there's nothing left. In Ephesians 4, verse 28 through 32, let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands, look at this, that he may have to give to them that have none. I didn't say that's something you put in the plate. This is something you do for your fellow man as opportunity comes up. There are people with situations where we have the opportunity and the resources, and we've got something out here to help them with. We don't spend down to the bare bone. We don't spend living paycheck to paycheck unless we really have a problem with the amount of money that's coming in. Sometimes that does happen. But I want to suggest to you that God's rule for the budget is these four core things: God, family, self, and charity. And those things are all part of the way the Christian sets up the budget. I'm going to leave that for Bill to develop with you all at another time, but those are four easy points. Now, here's what we got to watch out for, and that is covetousness. Because greediness is in the category of idolatry. There are many people that would not even think of bowing down to a Buddha or bowing down to some pagan statue, but yet when it comes to money, they will bow down to that. And as we talked this morning, some people have their God is their stomach. Some people's God is their wallet, or their purse, or their money, or their bank account, and they worship that, and they protect it as if it was sacred, and they have bowed down to the God of gold. And they are serving an idol, while at the same time, they think they're serving God. You cannot do both. You cannot serve God and mammon, we're told in the New Testament. By their fruits you'll know them. And what that simply means, in Matthew 7, verse 15 through 20, is we're going to be able to tell by what people do where their heart is. And we'll be able to tell where their indulgence is. There's a man that made me madder than I think I've been in most of my life. He came to my house one night and knocked on my door. Actually, I kicked him out of my house. Only person I've ever thrown out of my house, and I threw him out. And he came to my house one night. He'd been doing some studying, and he told me, he said, Art, he said, look all around you in your house, and he said, you've got all these nice things, and I am just willing to bet you, which is what we're going to talk about, I'm just willing to bet you that you would not be willing to sell all that you have and give it to the poor. And it made me mad. Because this man was an alcoholic and had all kinds of other stuff, and he flipped the table on me, and he made me good and mad, and when I broke track, then it's like, you need to leave. We'll talk about this another time, but you're out of here. This is a conversation about you. But it haunted me. And guess what I did one day? I got hold of a real estate dealer, and I had an auction, and I sold everything I had, and I gave it away. Because I wasn't sure what the answer to that question was. And so I did it. Now, you don't have to do that. But I did it because I wanted to see, do I have the courage to put that to the test? And I did. And I had it all back and more within 6 months. Do you love the Lord enough to do what He asked the rich young ruler to do? Sell all that you have and give your money to the poor. I had to take that back. I kept my Bible. I kept some of my study books. So I didn't sell it all. Do you love the Lord that much? That was the question that haunted me, and I had to find an answer. Well, let's talk about money. I was down in Biloxi, Mississippi, standing looking down the road that goes by the ocean. looking at the interstate folded up like dominoes, just rippled along. As I looked down that highway where once buildings and businesses were and where all the vacationers were, I saw an area that there was very little evidence there had been anything there except for the massive piles of debris that had washed up on the shores and were piled up against the trees. I stood and looked at Jefferson Davis's home place, historical monument in our culture. I looked at that, and the stuff that was in there was washed out on the beach and buried in the sand. And all the debris, mausoleums had been sucked open by a hurricane, and bodies were various places. I was on the scene 2 days after Hurricane Katrina. My job was to work with the first responders who were responding to a very horrific situation and to try to help them maintain their sanity as they recovered bodies. I was there with a team called Indiana Hoosier, or Operation Hoosier Relief. So the Hoosiers invaded the South. Over to my right, as I stood, I saw a huge riverboat. I looked on down, there were some others down there, but they weren't where they belonged. They weren't anywhere near the water. They were up on the land. They'd been catapulted by Hurricane Katrina and just catapulted. And one had sat on top of the Holiday Inn and had kind of teetered there and found its resting place. Little did we know in our makeshift campsite that the stench we were smelling was the bodies that were inside the Holiday Inn. It was a gruesome sight. I walked down to the casino that was up on the Holiday Inn, and I looked in to see what I could see. And there, the machines, the roulette wheel, the slot machines, coins were just falling out, and they were full of debris that if you touched them, you'd probably break out with who knows what. And I began to think how cankered all of the things that had brought people pleasure were, and how that really wasn't what pleasure was about. As I talked to some of the folks there, some of the good old Southern folks have been there for a while, they told me a story of what that community used to be like before the gambling casinos came in. And they pictured for me a little quiet shrimping town, down in Mississippi. I think I said that like they say it. Down in there, and basically a quiet little town that was very focused on God and family and community. And then they began to tell me about how the casinos had changed the town into a place of prostitution and immorality, and how the crime rate had gone up 60%, and how that it was all about the money. I ventured down, escorted by the National Guard. We were going down surveying some of the things, and as I ventured down, I saw a sight that just shocked me beyond what I was experiencing. Because what I saw is there was a casino, the Hard Rock Cafe, was just about to open when Hurricane Katrina hit as their gambling place. And what I saw is the corporate people had shipped in all kinds of people to get that back up and going. And here everybody was out there, they were raking the yard, getting all the debris out and all, while next door, body retrievals and neighbors were trying to help out neighbor. And they were trying to get their casino back up and going again. And something came over me. When I saw the greed for gold, and we don't want to lose any more money, we have to get this up and going again. Rather than helping our neighbor, we're going to get ourselves back in business so that we can take money from our neighbor. And it did something to me. It also taught me something about the industry of gambling. And I also learned that as I talked to some of those with those casinos, that what they told me is those new casinos pay for themselves within the first 6 to 8 months. They're multi-million-dollar industries. They are not paying for those by losing. They're paying for them by winning, which brings me to my topic. Gambling, as we see, as we would find in this lesson, is money or something of value that is the vehicle for gaming and transforming gaming into gambling. Gambling is about probability. It's about, I think I'll win at the expense of you losing. And it's about machines that are set up for profit. It's about people who are squandering their, what they should be stewards of, betting against the laws of probability. If you've ever been in math, you know the laws of probability is each time that you drop your coin doesn't mean that you increase your chance of winning. Each time you drop the coin or that you play the game, each time you have the very same probability, which is pretty low. Now here's what the casinos know. They know, and they are set up for, I know because I've talked with them, they are set up for a 10% profit. What that means is 10% of the time you win, and 90% of the time they win. And what they also know is that when you win your 10%, you're going to put it back in and probably lose it. How'd you like to have a business that had 100% profit, or even 95%, or even 90%? You see, they're betting that you're going to lose. Now that would be the casinos. But I see brethren sometime on a little bit lighter trend, if there is such a thing, going down to convenience stores and buying lotto tickets and doing some of that other type of gambling. There are people who gamble online and go on daily and gamble online. A lot of folks say, well, I don't see anything wrong with that. People will go and they'll go down to bingo halls and they'll go down and do raffles and various things that are really games of chance or opportunities of chance. It's not really about donations. It's about, I think I'm going to win something. And what happens is that we end up with betting money on an outcome of a game or a contest or some other event and squandering that which we need to be good stewards of. The definition suggests three elements involved in gambling. An event, an uncertain event that is arbitrarily determined. There is a bet or a wager that is deliberately thrown up to chance. There is a winner and there is a loser. And the winner gains at the expense of the loser. We're talking about casinos and lotteries, coin toss, point spreads on games, on dogs, on horses, on fights, bingo, for profit, raffles, poker, roulette, slots, blackjack, online gambling, and even street dice. There's always a way to do the hustle. The question is, should the Christian be involved in this? It is another way, as we said, to chase the high, to chase the rush, to kick in the peptides and the endorphins and the adrenaline, and to send our body into kind of hyper mode where we're all jazzed up and excited and almost manic, if not manic. And so there's a complex variation here of the chemicals in our body that feed this compulsive stuff there's biological, behavioral, psychological, and even social attitudes that kick in at this point. There are also cognitive distortions where we delude ourselves or deceive ourselves into the belief that we're going to eventually have the big win. If I keep at it long enough, I'll have the big win, and I will beat all the odds. Being unrealistically lucky can also be a distortion, and some people do win. But at what cost? I have people come back from Las Vegas and say, oh, I won $500. I'm like, well, how much did it cost you to win that? And they don't count that. And some do win. And that's what messes things up, because you see, these places want someone to win. They want the ching, 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 ching. They want that to happen because that gets everybody else excited thinking that's going to happen to them. And by the way, if you've ever been inside of a casino, have you ever noticed there's no windows in there? Have you ever noticed there's no clocks in there? Have you ever noticed you can't tell the difference in day and night in there? Guess who designed those? Folks in my field. Folks in my field, unfortunately. They designed it to where you lose track of time. You lose track of space. Where you become obsessed with that machine, pulling the slot, or hitting the button, or riding the roulette wheel, or whatever. And what we see is that this gambler's fallacy plays in the belief that ultimately they will come out on top, they will win something. Now let me break down this into categories. Young people, as I said, are out gambling the adults 4-to-1. Did you know that? For every one adult gambler, you got 4 kids. And by that I mean people, I shouldn't say kids, but young people under 18 are doing this. Older adults, there's a disproportionate amount of older adults that are caught up in gambling. We see this with the nursing homes and with the outings and the buses going to the bingo halls. And here's the price that often they pay, is the money that needs to go to their medications and to whatever bills they have on fixed incomes. That's going into the gambling. And many times what we're seeing with older adults, we are seeing people that forego their medications, that forego their health stuff, because they're ashamed that they've lost all their money. So they just sit with sometimes not even the food they need until the next month when the check comes back in. We're seeing a lot of stuff like that going on. And with that ultimately goes the depression, the financial loss. I was at a man's apartment the other day. He'd been out gambling. He has diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. And we missed him for about 4 days. I went to his apartment and he was almost catatonic because he had been off his medicines. And you know why? He had sold his medicines to buy his lottery cards. We had to hospitalize him, and he's in process of being stabilized again. This is a man who's had some very serious problems, and he'd been in the state hospital for a number of years prior to coming to us. But he was willing to forego taking care of himself in order to try to have the big win. That's the gambler's fallacy. Women, we see women gamble more than they do in previous years. As a matter of fact, we see an increase in females that has gone up to about 82% of the gamblers today are females. That didn't used to be the case. Also, what we find is there's some cultural ethnicity pieces here. Recent immigrants to this country have bought into the lie that you can win big. This is the American dream. And what we see is a lot of those who are immigrants who come in the country buy into this. Financial pressures of settling in a new country, learning, getting a job, all those kinds of things. And here's the big win. And you go down here, someone's told them you put your money down here and you win big over here. And then they find out that's not true. Or it might be if you do it again. Homelessness, those that are homeless. And I deal with many of them. Those who are homeless are often caught up in, if you get a dime in your pocket, then use it to gamble. We've got a man that I have to tell him, get in this car. Because he's one of the guys that stand at the end of the interstate. He's got this sign. He's never been homeless a day in his life. I know that. Now he has slept around in parks and all, but he's always had the means to have a place that he wanted. But you know what he does? He gambles. And I picked him up one day. I got to tell you this story, and then we'll move on. He was standing on the side of the road, and he said homeless, which he wasn't, because he was living in one of my apartments, or one of our apartments. And he had this sign up, and it said homeless. I have a paper plate in my head until I can afford a medal. Please help. I called him my name. Give me that sign. Get in this car. I have fun with my homeless people. But by the way, that sign I think is in my trunk if you want to see it. Anyway, sometimes we have folks with comorbid disorders, mood disorders, anxiety disorders, personality disorders, or impulse disorders, and they get caught up in this too. And here's some signs and symptoms that you can watch for. These will be more subtle, but you just got to watch for these things. How do we know someone's caught up in gambling and something's wrong? You're going to see them borrowing money from everyone in sizable amounts. Can you loan me $20 to pay that? A little short this time. Can you front me 10? Can you give me 50? Can you? And what they're doing is they're collecting, but don't think you'll see that again. Then we have frequent requests from the company for advances in pay. We will see anger, isolation, preoccupation, some of that withdrawal in your head. We're calculating. I'm not going to cover this. You may see chronic fatigue from sitting up either in the boats or various places like the computer, gambling all night, and so you may see exhaustion. Be a constant use of the phone, more than likely, and usually not job related. Look for the sports pages and for racing forums to be in view around your house. Expect lots of stops at the convenience store. That's where you're buying some of your tickets. Expect them to be defensive and argumentative, and if you want to know where the money went, then expect them to come back with something out of the closet at you. Out of the closet meaning an argument from the past, but we can divert the issue. And then the unexplained lack of money, and that's going to be there. I'm going to move quickly through some of this. Defense mechanisms that we're going to see is denial. I don't have a problem. I can stop when I want to. That's typical addiction stuff. Minimizing what's not that bad. You know, we still have a home, or we still have a family, or we still have a bank account. So minimizing is going to go there. Blaming. Well, we wouldn't be doing this if you would kick it over your way. Manipulation. That is, I'm conning you out of some money. Well, I left my money home. Can you front me until we get home? And so forth. And so those are just some of the things that we see. And here's what I believe is wrong with gambling. I believe gambling is wrong, as in being sinful, for several reasons I will mention this morning, or this afternoon. First, it is addictive. That is, it enslaves, it's enslaving, and the nature of it is enslaving. And that even is seen in the gamblers' literature. There's a group called Gamblers Anonymous. And if you ever get anybody caught up in addiction, by the way, most of your anonymous groups, all of them that I know, are 12-step groups. And those 12 steps, I haven't said much about, but those 12 steps actually used to have Bible verses by them. And if you take those 12 steps, you can pull them off the internet, or I've got copies with me. If you take those, you put a Bible verse by every one of them. And I don't have a conflict with the 12-step philosophy and Bible philosophy except this. The 12-step philosophy is a much more generic version of what the Bible teaches. But I can start there and bring you here. So I don't have a problem starting there, but I don't want to end there because there's much more in the bigger book. But at any rate, Gamblers Anonymous talks about the very nature of how it's progressive and how it is addictive, and those that are caught up in this, you want to hear what it's really like. Listen to the ones that are trying to get out of it, that are telling the whole story in its whole honesty. And what you realize is this isn't something that's playing with people. They get caught up in the obsession of this thing. In 1 Corinthians 6 and verse 12, all things are lawful for me, but all things are not helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. We've looked at that several times, but I want you to note that many times people are caught up in the power of the addiction, in whatever form that addiction takes. Let me say this at this point, and then I need to move to the next one. But addiction is a tricky thing. And that is when the addiction is about your life being out of balance. When we have an out of balance life, you ever lay down the balls and you take a bat, you got to hit this thing, and you hit it, and it pops up, and you play that thing, whatever that thing is called. One day I'll figure it out. If you know, do me a favor, tell me. But that's kind of how addiction is. That out of balance stuff is going to show up in your life. And so we get the alcohol and drugs under control, and that pops the gambling addiction. And we get that under control, and then we may have a shopping addiction. We get that under control, we may have a sexual addiction. You know, and they're just kind of popping up and down like that because an obsessive mind needs something to obsess on. Now I'm going to say something else that you may think rather strange. Don't think I've lost my mind or gone unfaithful on you. But sometimes I see persons who are obsessed with religion. And by that I'm talking about people like many years ago, the Jim Jones and the Guyana thing. I'm talking about people who are leaders of cults. I'm talking about folks that are drawing away disciples to follow them. I'm talking about people who will almost, if not altogether, lose their mind obsessing about religion. I'm talking about people like a man that some of y'all worshiped with years ago that came to me and said, you know, I have read Matthew 5 and it says if your eye offends you, pluck it out. He said, I'm ready to do that. That's obsession. Okay. Not only was he ready, he was planning to. You see, that's obsession. And so what I want to suggest to you is God expects balance in our life. God expects balance in our life. So we've got to be very careful on these things. It is addictive. Gambling is addictive, and what we're told is that we must have self-control. That's one of the things that Christians are to have as one of the Christian graces in our life, is self-control. 2 Peter 1 at verse 5. In the next place, not only is it addictive, in that we get obsessed with it, and it becomes the God in our life, and we become a slave to covetousness, but, as I say, it is that which is part of idolatry. Colossians 3 and verse 5 says covetousness is idolatry. We want to win at the expense of others, not necessarily caring what happens to the others. We must be aware of the love of money. 1 Timothy 6 and verse 10. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, we're told. And the many chasing after that have ended up in perdition. Well, you want to look at that verse in light of gambling and the things that feed that. Now, I want to tell you, just like with drinking, and just like with some of these substances abuse, these things usually start out small. And a person says, well, I don't see the harm in it. And what happens is that where you start is not where you stop when it comes to feeding these things. These things are not playing with us. Where you start is not where you stop. That it is progressive and it will continue to be satisfied. That's tolerance increase that we talked about last night. It takes more to get the same effect, the same excitement, the same buzz, and after a while what I did doesn't excite me. It's like, well, what's that like? Oh, and by the way, if you're in the casino, gambling, especially if you're out in Reno or Las Vegas, guess what? Drinks are on the house. As long as you're playing the machines. Oh, really? What are you drinking tonight? Well, let me try this. Well, have you ever tried? Well, here's some complimentaries. And those are free until you're out of money. What are we doing? Why is that? Because of feeding the obsession and knowing that our moral conscience goes to sleep. Why would you do that? So it is part of covetousness. It's also a violation of the golden rule. Because I believe that when we look at gambling, what we are seeing is stealing by consent. Just like murder, or just like dueling is murder by consent, gambling is stealing by consent. And I think there's a contrast, a parallel between dueling and gambling. It's an effort to beat someone out of what that person really doesn't want to give up, or what that person really may need in order to take care of their family, but we're going to do them out of it. How's that loving our neighbor as ourselves? Matthew 22, verse 39, and Matthew 7 and verse 12. I believe it also violates the principle of stewardship. That is, that if we're going to squander and waste that which is our master's, how will it be any different from the unjust steward who has squandered his master's goods? The steward has a weighty responsibility. The steward's a manager. We're in the management business, folks. The stuff we have doesn't belong to us. Did you know that? It's not yours. It's on loan to you. I think you all know Bob Dickey. Bob Dickey, back in high school, liked to pull jokes. He was on a field trip one day. Everybody know Bob? Most of you? He was on a field trip one day, riding along the bus, and he was crossing the cross, and several fellows sitting by him, and he says, they were looking out, and he says, he saw a farm and several cattle out on the hill. He said, yeah, my dad owns that. The guy said, really? And they rode along, he looked the other way, and said, my dad owns that. And riding along, he says, yeah, my dad owns this too. And the fellow said, well, your dad must really be rich. He said, well, yeah, he owns the world, he's God.
Oh.
We're stewards of his. It's his, it's not ours. And we need to respect the fact that we're stewards. It violates the law of legitimate means of transfer of money and property. In Ephesians 4:28, let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands, that he may have to give to those who have not. Now, what it says here is there's a law of labor. You labor working with your hands, and as a result of that, you have a little left over, or some left over, that you help other people with. But there's something else there that I just want to mention in this verse. Because what he tells us is about quitting and starting in this verse. And here's what he tells us. that when you come to the Lord, God expects you to do the opposite of what you just did. He doesn't just expect you to quit. And I think herein is the problem why we lose people in church, is because a lot of times folks come to the Lord and think, okay, I need to quit what I was doing, and they stop there. They say, I'm sorry I did all that, and I'm quitting. And we sit here in low idle with all these empty spots in our life that were used to be filled by all the stuff we quit. Now we got all these empty spots. Did you see this verse? Let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands. Do you see that here what he does is on the whole spectrum? Here's a person that used to take stuff from people. He was a thief. He stole. Now what's he doing? He's giving. The repentance cycle is not complete until the fruits of repentance are the opposite of what you did. Do you see that? It's a neat verse. It's a neat verse. But in our context now, what we see is that, that there's a law of transfer of property. And we're told in 2 Thessalonians 3 and verse 10 that if a man doesn't work, neither should he eat. And one of my Korean friends came down to see us and talked to one of the homeless people, and a homeless person was in my office and said, I don't have anything to eat. And bless her heart, what she said is she put her finger in his face and she says, you know work, you know eat. She was right. So we gave him a job. And he got to eat. Anyway, the thing here is that God has a law of transfer of funds. And it's not this one that has to be gambling. It also breeds other kinds of sins. You can tell something's wrong by the company it keeps. Some things just aren't right because they're in the wrong company. And that is, we see such things as suicide, increased crime rates. By the way, in Atlantic City, crime went up 66% there when the casinos came in. All sorts of vice. People at the gas station offering to sell their wife for gas money. Favors with their wife for gas money in order to get back home. I wouldn't want to be married to somebody like that. Because I'm not a wife either. But 500% increase in drunk driving, credit card thefts, embezzlement, prostitution, robberies. By the way, all of those, the latter part of those are from what happened in Biloxi, Mississippi, just before Hurricane Katrina hit. And when I was told that the storm you're about to go down and see the effects of has covered 60 square miles, and it is of biblical proportions. And I thought, well, we've got some Baptist out here that has made that statement somewhere, and then I got down there and looked at all that, and it's like, oh yes, oh yes. Oh yes. Like the locust invasion of the Old Testament book of Joel. Like some of the horrible blights that came upon Egypt. A couple of people said, you know, this is God's punishment to us. I was in church on Sunday morning. I had found in the midst of all this congregation that had been washed out, the pews were all washed up in a heap, and we managed somehow Sunday morning to worship. It was a powerful service. I told him who I was, and it happened that the preacher that was there, that he was supposed to be burying his wife the day Katrina hit. And so he was just devastated by everything. So when I told them who I was, they asked me if I'd speak. And I said yes. And what I did is I combined the two things that I do, and I put them into the same service. And I talked about the book of Acts and Paul being shipwrecked, but we're all here saved. And then after we ended the service, I suggested, I think it's a time that we need to really do some sharing like we may not have ever shared before. And I know each of you have things that are on your minds. And what I'd like to do as we've ended the service, we're taking the Lord's Supper, the service is over, and I'd like for you all to kind of get in just a little semicircle as best we can. And let's talk about what you need us to pray about. We went around some horrible stories of people that were in distress. I know my loved one is drowned. I have no idea where they are, and I'm just haunted by the dreams of them bobbing up down in the water out there somewhere. I can't connect with my family. And various other things that they asked to pray for. I asked one of the elders there if he would write all those things down, and we went around and had individual prayer. But I won't ever forget the prayer and the way it started. Now, this gentleman was a black gentleman. And he got up and he started his prayer, and it went something like this. And I'll try to use his vernacular. He said, Lord, we weren't looking at you. Fact is, we'd even forgotten about you. And we got so stuck on our stuff that we couldn't see you. And you took away our stuff. And now we see you real good. We see you real good. Can we have some of our stuff back? And then we prayed individually for each other. It was quite a service. Quite a service. And I think sometimes in order to make us really appreciate what we have in life, we need to see what it means to do without it. And then we come to our core. We come to the center of who we are. Folks, Satan has strongholds that he builds in their lives. And sometimes it's in the area of materialism. Sometimes it's in the area of poor stewardship. It's in the area of squandering that which belongs to God, that which we should use in His service. And he builds a stronghold in our life. There's a war that is raging. It's not fought in the battlefields of the world. It's not in the air or on the sea. It's a war, nevertheless, that is so fierce that only the brave and the valiant can even think of enduring its heat. Because the battle we fight is inside us. The call, come ye out, and be separate, and touch not the unclean thing, is the call of God. And the promise tied to that is, and I will be to you a father, and you will be to me sons and daughters. Here's the problem. Is many people want the promise without the practice. Until we come out and are separate and are not touching the unclean things, not getting tainted by those things that are cankered by man and distorted by the devil. Until we do that, God will not be a father, and we cannot be sons and daughters as He wants that relationship to be. Because we have not done our part. Come ye out is a call for action. Come ye out and be separate is a call for choices. And touch not the unclean thing is a challenge every time Satan puts a temptation in our face. Satan sets up strongholds in many forms. In the form of addictions, habits, enticements. And sometimes these things even permeate our families. But make no mistake about it. Because the battle we are fighting is not against our husband or our wife. It is not about our children, not against our children. The battle we are fighting is a battle with Satan. And what we need to see is that Satan has permeated, in some cases, not only our lives, but the lives of those we love. And it is time for Satan to be cast out. It is time to take this roaring lion who goes around seeking whom he may devour, and to put up the cages and the barriers in our families, and in our homes, in our congregations. It's time to cage Satan up and cast him out. He has no place among the children of God. And we must stand firm on that. I would ask you this afternoon, has Satan built a stronghold in your life? Has he built a stronghold in your family? Has he laid claim to your son or daughter? And if he has, It is a time for action. It's a time for the redeemed to stand up and say so. It's a time to set boundaries. It's a time to say, Satan, you go no further in this family. It's a time to say to our loved ones, you are welcome here, but your addiction is not. And here's why I say that. Not only because I believe that's what God wants, but because until the pain of the addiction is greater than the pleasure of the addiction, the addict will stay active in their addiction. The way of the transgressor is hard, and God's redeemed must take the stand and set the boundary exactly where God set it in no other place. Jesus is a sure thing. You don't have to bet on him. He's a sure thing. And with him, you'll win every time. Because you see, Jesus doesn't want losers. Jesus wants us all to be victorious. I would ask you this afternoon, are you claiming the victory that Jesus gave you? If you're here as one that needs to respond to the gospel, we're going to sing a song here. If you need to come to be baptized in Christ, if you need to come and acknowledge something in your life to cast Satan out, then this opportunity is yours. I invite you to come. I'll be standing this morning.